Hello, and welcome to another episode of Coach.Better from Maduro Learning. My name is Clint Hamada.
And my name is Kim Capino, and we'll be your hosts for today's episode.
Today I'm talking to Adrienne Michetti, middle school digital literacy coach at United World College, Southeast Asia, East Campus. Adrienne has tons of practical tips and strategies to build relationships and make coaching successful, especially in such a large school community. Her experiences in many different types of coaching settings also provide some great insight into making coaching work, no matter what the context. Clint couldn't be here today, so this conversation is just me and Adrienne.
If you enjoy any part of this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really does help us to know what you want to hear more about. Also, subscribe to the channel to see all of our coaching videos and click on the notifications bell so you know as soon as each video is posted.
And please make sure to watch all the way to the end. We've got two great opportunities for your professional learning that we think you'll love. Let's get started. Okay, Adrienne, welcome to the Coach.Better podcast. Can you please introduce yourself, tell us your name, your school, a little bit about your professional history?
Okay, so my name is Adrienne Michetti, and I'm currently a digital literacy coach in the middle school at United World College of Southeast Asia, East Campus. I've been in this role at this school for 5 years. This is my 6th year this year. In the middle school, it's only been a few years. This is my 3rd year just in the middle school. So the first few years were in middle and high school. Prior to this, I had a similar role at the Australian International School. And then before that, I was teaching internationally in middle and high school all over the place. So
awesome.
Different countries.
So in both of those schools, in the Australian International School and at UWC, you have this experience of trying to build rapport as a coach in your teaching community. What do you do to kind of help make those professional connections with other teachers, not just the personal side of things, but as a coach, that professional link with others?
So it always starts with the relationship. That sounds like super cliched and super like oversaid, but it's so true. And if I think about like the leverage that I've made like in the past year or so compared to the leverage I made in my first year in this role in this school, like it's a huge, massive difference. And that's just because I've stayed here. Like I've just been here and people now know me. What have I done to make those relationships positive and to build that rapport? Sometimes, well, I don't know. This is a hard question for me to answer because I think I'm normally a people person. Like I am naturally a people person and I'm quite extroverted and I'm just genuinely curious about people. And so in many ways, that's why this is a great job for me. So sometimes it's finding these are things that other people have pointed out to me that I do very naturally without thinking about them. So I'll just name some of them that I've only recently become aware that are like possible skills that other people could use. So like really so paying attention to or picking up on other people's interests, be it professional or sometimes even personal. Like sometimes the personal interest can then lead to a professional interest later. I am usually like genuinely curious when someone mentions something they're interested in that I don't have any idea about, or I'm like, what is that? Tell me more about that. That's not to say it's always easy. So, depending on how I tend to approach those things in a very friendly, like low threat manner, like without any agenda. But sometimes I think just because of the role I'm in, there are on occasion people for whom even that like kind of inquiry seems maybe not threatening, but suspicious to them. Like they think I'm trying to get at something else. And sometimes I am, and other times I'm not. But in order to like build relationships with even the most challenging people, like I've had to really dig deep into my toolbox of social skills to figure out how to get there. I've done all kinds of things, Kim. I have done like probably the most strategic, almost sneaky thing that I've done is found out when a teacher is on duty in a particular place in the school and like made myself there, like physically in that space in like the block before I know they're going to be on duty, so that we accidentally run into each other. It sounds so horrible, but it's true, because in those very casual conversations is sometimes where that relationship starts. And so if I'm not normally in the same, I mean, this is a giant school, like it's enormous. And so if I'm not normally in that part of the school, I have to really get creative about like find out like, okay, where does that person eat lunch? Like what are they doing on their break? Like, are they the person who stays in their classroom during lunch and break time? Because if they are, then that's really hard. Then I need to figure out like what time do they get to school? What time do they leave? So things like that. I mean, that's the minority. That's not the majority of teachers, but there have been occasions. And in one situation, I can report that was super successful. Like my dedicated, like, oh, I just happen to be in the pod every Friday at break time, led to much more increased trust with an individual. So does that answer the question?
Yes. And you hit on two really interesting points. And I just want to come to the like easier one first and say like kudos to you for figuring out where people are on break. Like that is so strategic and so smart, especially in a really big school. I think that is a very tangible takeaway for coaches when you're either new to a school and maybe you just don't know people and you're not really sure how to see them because the culture of the school is different than what you're used to, whatever it may be. Or if you're in a really big school and there are some people you just don't run into because we know what that's like. Sometimes there's just people you never see. So I think like that is a really...
I feel like I'm giving away my secrets here.
I
like,
know, you are. That was a good one.
And they're going to be like, that's why you're always there.
No, that was a really good one. But I think it shows dedication to your job. I know the way you phrased it made it sound like you thought it was sneaky, but actually what it is you're trying to make a personal connection with someone that you rarely run into. So to do that, you want to provide an opportunity to run into that person. And that's what you did. And sometimes we have to do that.
Usually with those ones, it's often been also very strategic people. So like, I wouldn't necessarily do that I wouldn't necessarily go that far out of my way with every individual. But if it's like a head of department or someone really key in a team, then it's like, okay, what I evaluate, what am I going to get out of this? And the answer, like for those people, is a lot. Like it's high return on that investment.
Well, exactly. And you have to be that way as a coach because you're looking at trying to help move the whole school forward. And sometimes those key people are really critical in doing that. So I think that's really smart.
Exactly.
The other thing I wanted to hit on was you made a point that you feel like your impact or the way that you're able to leverage the relationships you have has grown so much, like potentially exponentially in the last year compared to the previous years because you've been at the school so much longer. And I've had a couple of conversations where that has come up, and I think it is so interesting because in so many situations in international schools, we almost leave before we have the opportunity to see the fruits of our relationships.
Yeah, that's so true. And this is the place that I've stayed the longest. This is the school that I've been in the longest. And so that's also been a growth area for me, like seeing that value. And I think like in the past, if you were to look at Adrienne 10 years ago, I was the kind of person who wanted to just like, bam, arrive, change everything up, and then like go somewhere else and do something similar. But now I'm seeing that actually that is not, that does not sustain any kind of change. It means that those changes would then leave when I leave as well. So this is a different. Jeez. Did you hear that?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's thundering.
In the rain.
But yeah, so this is new to me. It's new learning for me to see that develop, and it's really, really worth it. Like it's awesome.
I think it's a good takeaway for people who are maybe not a coach who's in their first year of their coaching role and they're not even really sure if they like coaching, but somebody who knows they really love this job and they really want to make an impact. It's just another element to consider as you're making those decisions about whether or not you leave a school or which school you go to next, that actually maybe this job is kind of similar in a leadership role where you need to be there a little while before you see those things.
And also, I think it's important for people doing the hiring to consider that too, right? So if you're hiring a coach and it's been a couple of years and you're not seeing a lot of change, like just like give it a bit more time. Like that doesn't mean don't change anything and don't like help develop them as a coach, but it's sometimes, depending on the teams they're working with, like it can take years to develop a relationship where there's enough trust to change things up. So yeah, and I'm really fortunate. I have great leadership here, so that's easy.
Awesome. I think those are really good takeaways for coaches. So thinking about your role at UWC and maybe also previously your other experience, but how do you help not just leadership, but also teachers understand that culture of coaching? Like, how do you build that feeling, or I keep saying the culture of coaching in your school? What do you do as a coach to advocate for that?
That's a much harder, it's a much harder job, like way, way harder. And that is not something that I could ever do by myself. Like, I can say that definitively, like that is for sure. So like at AIS, this is a great contrast, because at AIS, I was the only coach, and God, was that ever lonely? Like, that was so lonely and so hard. I was like, it was basically me bouncing ideas off the librarian all the time, because she was the only person who was in a role that was like remotely similar to mine. And she was super and supportive, and like she was also looking for someone to collaborate with. But there was no culture of coaching. Like, it was not possible. When you're the only one, it's just so hard. Whereas at UWC, so a lot of the groundwork for that was done before I arrived, which I am very, very grateful for. But I don't know how much, like, if I even reflect back on my first couple of years here, I don't know how much of the culture was about coaching, or actually, now that I'm saying it, maybe it's just that our definitions were different. So what coaching meant in 2013 was much more around like integration of technology, and occasionally was pedagogical. And it has evolved a lot. And that's not just because of me, that's because of our curriculum evolving, for one. Like, that was a big driver. Also, we took on board other coaches in the school. So we did not have just digital literacy coaches, but in the primary school, we had literacy coaches and numeracy coaches. And our director of teaching and learning sees himself as a coach as well. And so we kind of banded together a little bit. Like, we would share resources and share strategies. And so that has really developed us as a team of coaches across the school. There was also significant, like this, I really feel like my answer to this is I did none of this. Because there was significant professional learning money that went into our school, courtesy of James DL, for cognitive coaching. And that was for everyone in leadership, senior leadership and middle leadership. Like, that was it was a massive professional learning expense. But it was part of his vision that would be a culture of how we communicated on this campus. So he saw it beyond just the like coaching aspect of leadership, but he wanted it to be something that we just all do, like, as a framework for communication. And it has become that way now. Like, the only people who are really left to attend cognitive coaching seminars or sessions are the people who come in new, because almost everyone, like, if you've been here more than 3 years, you've been through cognitive coaching. So the leaders, like myself, had access to that earlier than classroom teachers. But yeah, a lot of that groundwork was done before I arrived. So yeah, I don't know what else to say about that. So I feel like my work around building the culture of coaching now is really more adaptive. It's really about how I adapt coaching in my particular domain. The culture exists here now. And so now I'm, I don't know, playing with it to make sure that it matches my specific context, or not just mine, but like our middle school's context.
I think you're hitting on a bunch of different points there. One, I think, is the power of the school culture to influence every single little conversation that you have. And I think your experience with James pushing through that cognitive coaching for all teachers, it's so obvious that once you've invested in it, that everybody is committed to it, and the conversations all then fit into that framework of thinking about peer development and all those kinds of things. So there's like that whole piece. Then there's the other piece that is, as a coach, you may have, I'm going to try to explain this the best way I can. You may have experience in other coaching models because you've worked in other schools. Then you come into this particular setting and it's cognitive coaching. So then you, like you're just describing, you're adapting all of your personal experience and all of your personal connections and all of that prior knowledge to this format and structure that exists in your school. And I think that is something that's really important for coaches to remember. Just because you've done it, and it's the same thing we would say to teachers too, right, or administrators, just because you've done it one way successfully in another school doesn't mean that that format or framework or language or vocabulary, any of that is going to work in this setting. So you take all of that prior knowledge and adapt it to where you're at now. And I think that's what you're talking about.
Yes, so accurate. You nailed it. Yes.
All right, so you did mention something before that I want to come back to, which is you said that in your previous school, it was super lonely because you were the only coach. How did you, and I know you weren't there for like too long, but how did you stay motivated in that environment when maybe you were the only one who was passionate about technology for learning, or you were the only one who wanted to move the school in a certain direction? Like, how did you keep yourself going every day?
I got into classrooms as often as possible. Like that was the number one. Like I needed to be in, anytime. I worked with the willing, first of all. Like I worked with the people who saw value somewhere, and those people would then be like, you know what, some of them became friends. And once they learned of how lonely it was in my role, they're like, you know what, anytime you feel like that, just come into 6th grade. Like just come into our class, like just hang out, get to know the kids, like do whatever. Like so I felt like I had some allies. So I would just hang out in those spaces, in those classrooms, which also then gave me exposure to the kids and let me, collect data even on like what was going on and what were some issues that maybe teachers weren't alerting me to, so I could observe. But it was, I guess I just capitalized on the relationships that were easy to build. I just like took those as far as I could. And I maintained that's one thing I've discovered definitely a shift in. Like in that school, the importance of me maintaining my professional learning network on Twitter and other places was like super high. Like I could not let go of those connections because I didn't have another team of people to bounce ideas off of. Whereas since I've come to UWC, I mean, you can see, you just have to look at my blog. It's evident I have not published anything since 2012. Like, that's terrible. I was like on it for a while, and now, and part of that is because I'm getting that feedback so regularly here. Like I am getting like that connection. Like there's so much. In fact, if anything, it's like too much. Like I have so many opportunities to network and connect, and I don't rely on that external network as much, which like I sometimes catch myself thinking like I really should tap into my external network more because it can get quite insular here. So I do have moments when I'm like, I am aware of that. But when I was alone, I relied on that network like crazy. So those were my strategies.
I think those are two really important points because especially in schools where coaching is new, where you're kind of often likely to find a newer coach, right? Because the schools aren't really sure of the role. They're not really sure who they're hiring. The person's kind of willing to take a bit of a risk. They're usually really isolated, and it is really hard. Like I've been in that position just like you. And when I've been in that position pre and post PLN, and pre-PLN, it was like really rough, like brutal. Brutal. But having that personal learning network helped so much. And I love, even if you didn't have a personal learning network yet and you were just building it, just the idea of getting into classrooms as often as possible, feeling that feeling you feel when you're around kids, which is why probably you became a teacher.
Exactly.
If you have a little bit of that every day, that can go a long way.
Yes, exactly.
So another challenge that I think coaches have, and maybe not so much in your experience at UWC because it sounds like it's such a rich culture already there, or maybe early in your time at UWC, is teachers understanding what a coach does, understanding what your job is. So how do you deal with that, and how do you help teachers understand what coaching really is? It's not just sitting at your computer all day.
Yep. So that's a great question. So there's a few techniques and little bits and bobs that I've tried over the years. And then I'll tell you about an initiative that we've started here at UWC, at East, just last year, which we're still building on. So the little bits and bobs that I do to make people aware of what I do, they seem really small, but they go a long way. So they're little things like my calendar, my Google Calendar is all like publicly accessible. So the default in Google Calendar, I think, is like to show whether you're free or busy. And mine includes details of what's in there. Like, and I have to deliberately go in and change the settings for it to be that way. But that's so that anytime someone goes to set it up an appointment with me or to check my calendar, they see what I'm working on with other people. So that's one tip. The other thing is I take advantage of, I'm doing this way more than I used to. Now it's kind of getting out of control. I need to scale back a bit, but I really take advantage of opportunities when our principal is sharing things, and she's often like, hey, do you have anything to share at morning briefing? Or she sends out a weekly update of like what's going on coming up in the week, that kind of thing. And so I take advantage of those opportunities, like, hey, can I put this in there? Hey, can I tell people about this? And sometimes it's just like informational, like, oh, by the way, we now have pro Padlet accounts. But other times it's much more process oriented, like, okay, this is what's happening with our online learning platform. This is who I've been talking to. This is what you can do when you're working with it. You can book a time with me. You can view these videos. So it's like, sometimes it's more process oriented and other times it's just transactional stuff, but I take advantage of those opportunities. And then it's also, so this is something that a former principal shared with me a few years ago. You can decide later if you want to edit this out. But Mike Johnston, who was our middle school principal, coached me. He was an excellent coach, and he coached me around an incident that arose. And I was like initially wondering why he had told me this. I thought, like, at first I thought he should have not told me this, and he should have made other choices about how to solve this issue. But in retrospect, I'm glad he told me about it, because it allowed a conversation that we might not have otherwise had. And the issue was that this was in my second year here, 2 staff members, who I still don't know who they are, 2 staff members had come to him to tell him that they were concerned because they saw me arrive on campus late on 2 different occasions. Yeah, 2 different people saw me. Now, this was also at a time, I will add, so as you know, I'm a little bit accident prone. And this was at a time when I had really injured my hand and like sliced off the tip of my finger. And so I was coming back from appointments with my hand surgeon, which is why, like, her earliest appointment is at like 8:30 in the morning or something like that. So I was just going to my appointment and getting to school at around 10. Anyways, apparently a couple of teachers saw that and were, I don't know who they are, and said something to him about like, what does Adrienne do all day? That kind of thing. And yeah, initially I was like, why are you telling me this? Like, why didn't you just defend me? Which I think he did, but he used it as an opportunity to talk to me about ways that I can let people know what I'm doing in my conversations with them. And that was a really useful talk. So he gave me several examples, and now I like, after that really stayed with me. So it's about talking about your work in invisible ways that don't make it seem like you're humble bragging. Do you know what I mean? So I'm trying to think of a really good example, but now they're all going to sound really inauthentic. It's you just have to really listen and pay attention. It's really about listening. And then when the opportune time comes up, it's something like, oh, you mentioned that last week you were working on fractions. That really reminds me because, or that reminds me of a conversation I had with X other person in your department when we were talking about not fractions, but like, I don't know, ratios. And they were having a similar issue or something like that. Like, I mean, that's a really arbitrary, horrible example, but I think you get the idea, is that how the question is, how do I let people know about what I'm working on through my conversations with them? So that's been really useful. And you can decide to use as much or as little of that story as you like. But then like the wider picture is something really exciting that we've been working on here at East Campus. So our I mentioned already about how we have a team of coaches at different parts of the school. And in the last couple of years, we recognized that we were all kind of working independently. Like, we have a lot of things to share. There was a lot of collegiality and like sharing. But inevitably when we'd get together, like over a beer or like coffee in the, staff room in the mornings, we'd end up sharing a story that like would resonate with the others. Like, oh my God, Jess, like I have that issue too. And so we started to realize that there were a lot of commonalities between us as coaches, even though our domains were different. So literacy, numeracy, and digital literacy coaches. And so we began to sort of collect what we think and believe and value about coaching and to put that all into writing. And so we met a series of times over last year, like 4 or 5 times as a team. It was really hard because there's like 7 of us across the school. It's really challenging. Oh, we also have an inquiry coach in the primary school. So it's very primary heavy in terms of coaches, but still valuable. And so with the intent, like we wanted to put these things together with the intent of almost relaunching coaching at our campus so that if anybody on our campus came to a coach, no matter which coach you were working with, the language would be the same. So the language we use to talk about the work we do with someone would be the same. It wouldn't be different. It wouldn't be like, oh, if I went to Dave, it's going to be like this. Or if I went to, I don't know, the numeracy coach, Patrick, in the primary school, it's going to be like this. We'd be using the same terms, the same frameworks, that kind of thing. And we felt that it was an opportune time to then also like define coaching. Like, this is what it is here. This is what we feel it is. And these are the menu options, so to speak. I think we called them something else, but like, these are the different ways you can access a coach and the different things that you might consider doing with a coach. This is what they can provide. And we framed that around our learning principles at school. So we have a set of learning principles, which have been like, they've been in place for a good, 7 or 8 years, maybe longer, before I arrived. And they are on both campuses, and they're heavily researched and referenced, but they're like boiled down to 10 or 12, I should know, but I can't remember now, statements about what we know about learning. Like, we know learners do best, it's not worded like that, or learners learn best when they feel safe and supported, for example, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that kind of thing. And so we use that series of statements. It's other ones like, we know that learners learn best when they feel ownership over their learning, when they can talk and share about their learning. It's that kind of thing. So we use that as our basis to develop a set of statements about teachers learning. And then we put a statement beneath it. So it was like, we know that teachers learn best when, and we went through, we basically used the same learning principles, but we modified it for professional learning. And then beneath each statement, we put a therefore statement that related to coaching. Therefore, coaches will, or therefore coaches should. Although we tried not to use the word should, but you get the idea. So that's still in draft mode, but we've been working on it for a while. So that's a big part of the, like, eventually when we relaunch that and share that, to help others understand what coaches do and why.
That's awesome, and going to make anyone who doesn't have a coaching team super jealous, because I think that is kind of the ideal of what many of us want to see happen in schools. Is not only do we want to see adult learning the same way we focus on student learning, because it's not unfortunately very rarely like that in school. Adult learning is like the opposite of how we teach our kids, but then also to have the coaching be such an integral part of the way that we look at adult learning. I mean, that's what we all want. Yeah. But I want to come back to your earlier story, because I think it is such a good point about making the work that you do that is invisible visible to others. And there's so many ways that you can do that. And you mentioned a bunch of them in your examples, but I think that's something that coaches have to be aware of on a regular basis, because you're in the thick of it. You're doing it all the time. you don't even realize that nobody knows what you're doing. It just looks like you're walking around or having casual conversation or eating lunch or whatever, but actually in all those things, it's all part of coaching. And even in schools where there is a strong culture of coaching, I think there's lots of opportunities for those little things to go wrong, and an equal number of opportunities for those things to go right. And those coaches that are conscious of the ways to make them go right are much more successful.
Yeah, I do my best. I mean, I don't always succeed with that. But yeah, I do my best. I think it's pretty, like, we put out a survey about the digital literacy team on both campuses. And actually just today, I was looking at the results of the survey for middle school East. Like, we asked teachers about like the quality of the professional learning they get from the digital literacy team, and like, do they feel they have access, and do they like all of that? And like more than 90% of teachers get what I do. Yeah, it's pretty good. There was still some people that answered not at all. And I was like, who are you? Maybe they don't know who I am. I don't know. But like, or maybe they don't like me and have a beef. I don't know. But anyways, I think in our school, at least, like the culture of coaching is pretty strong. So I don't have to do a whole lot other than just to maintain it.
And I think that's a thing on its own, right? Maintaining it too, and making sure that your language is consistent, and the way that you were talking about all the coaches from all the different disciplines having that consistent practice, so that teachers know coaching is coaching is a concept, is similarly implemented across disciplines. I think that's an important thing for teachers.
And it's so necessary in a school as big as ours, because things can get unwieldy so quickly. And so like, that's one thing that I have certainly valued at this school, not just in terms of the coaching language, but in terms of all language. Like, it takes leadership and commitment to decide and agree on the language that we use around things, because we're not using we're not using some framework for coaching that somebody just handed us. Like, we're developing it ourselves, and we have to agree to talk about these things the same way. Otherwise, you're going to confuse the hell out of people. Like, we're such a big school. We cannot go around explaining to 400 plus teachers that, oh, when Dave says this, he actually means this part of what I do. No, we can't. Like, we just can't do that. We'll lose credibility so fast. So that's really, really important.
Honestly, even in a small school, still important.
Really?
Yeah,
okay.
Definitely. Yeah. So I think that's a good takeaway for anyone.
Awesome.
So what you were just talking about reminds me of that as a coach, we wear many hats. So maybe you're the consultant, maybe you're the co-teacher, maybe you're the co-planner. What are the hats that you feel like you wear or are most priority for you? And how do you manage or juggle all of those things?
So that's also evolved. So I used to keep data on this, if you for real. And last year was the first year that I didn't. And halfway through the year, it kind of happened by accident. So about by October, I was like, oh my God, I haven't set up my logs yet. Oh my God. And I started to freak out, because I like to look at that data at different points in the year to see like what role I have been playing, like in each coaching situation. Because I've in the past liked to use that data when talking with senior leaders. Like, for example, in the first year that I was here, every interaction that I had with the French department was as tech support. Like, there was no coaching happening in there at all, that kind of thing. So I like to have that data. So I used to collect it. Last year, it just kind of slipped away from me, I think, because I was so busy with all this blended learning stuff that I just kind of forgot about it. And then by the time December rolled around, I was like, is it even worth it for me to set up? And I talked about it with one of the other coaches, and she was like, we kind of like have pretty good here. Like, maybe you can wean yourself off the data. And so I was like, okay, I'm just going to go for a year without collecting it and see how I feel and if I need it. And now here we are the next year, and I'm like, I so do not need to keep that data anymore. So I don't have any hard data this year on how much I spend in each of those roles. I think because I don't need it, but I can definitely say that there's been an evolution. So a lot of my time previously was spent as the tech specialist. So like being called in to like explain to everybody how Mentimeter works, or whatever, fill in the blank software, or show me how to create a unit on our online learning platform, or how do I use this add-on for Google Chrome or whatever it was? And that's like the lowest access. That's the hat that I like. It's the hat that I need to wear. And sometimes it's really, really necessary. But in terms of like changing learning, it is the least transformative role, unless it's combined with something else. So I've evolved out of that a little bit. And I think a lot of that is because also our staff have like totally upped their own technical knowledge and feel way more confident. That's also something that came out on our staff survey. Like they feel way more confident figuring out the technical stuff themselves than they used to. We have way fewer teachers who need their hands held when they're upgrading their operating system than we used to, like that kind of thing. So that's really good. So that's allowed me to evolve more into other roles. I haven't done much co-teaching in a while. So my role tends to go back and forth now between consultant and coach. And it tends to weigh a little bit more heavily on the consultant side, but from a cognitive coaching perspective, in terms of that role, like I'm definitely getting more requests as a coach. So yeah, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but it's
I think
an evolution.
I think it's really interesting that probably most coaches that are able to stay in a position for a number of years will hopefully see the same evolution that you're talking about from tech support, which is usually kind of the first, unless the school has had a long-standing history of a coaching culture and you're just replacing somebody else and they know what the job is and you just step right into it. Unless you're in like that situation, usually you come in and people see you as tech support, and it's exactly what we've been talking about this whole conversation, the building the relationships, the building the coaching culture, the building the understanding to transition into more of a coach. And in that sense, the consultant side of that coach, I think a lot of times as coaches, we feel like it's not as valuable as the coaching side. But I like to argue the other side of that and say that one of the reasons why teachers love coaches is because we can help make their job more efficient, get them to the place that they need to go faster because their work is busy, just like our work is busy. Mm-hmm. And if we're constantly asking questions and never helping make life a little more easy for them, I think it becomes hard for teachers to see the value of coaching.
Oh yeah, for sure, because they can't. I mean, if the role of a coach is to help another person mediate their thinking, like to do all that thinking all the time is really effing hard.
Exhausting.
Like sometimes you just want someone else who has more experience to tell you what they think is going to be better. Like sometimes that's all you want. So yeah, that's totally fine. I think one thing I've definitely been aware of in the last year, and I continue to be more aware of, is what my role is as I'm going into a meeting or going into an interaction. Like, what do these people need from me? And sometimes I'm even really explicit about it. Like, what are you looking for in this? Like, do you want this to be a coaching conversation or something similar to it? Or do you just want me to give you answers? Because like, I don't want to waste your time. But I think me being intentional about that, like I will think about that even like before, like as meeting prep, like before I've gone to the meeting so that I have an idea of how I'm going to approach it. So super important.
I think that's a key tip. What does the teacher need from you? Not what is the coaching conversation you want to have. Because sometimes the coaching conversation you want to have is going to take a series of like 5 weeks and several hours. And really they're just like in a panic because X, Y, and Z is going on in their classroom. So I think that question, what do they need from me in your pre-planning? And what do you need from me in the actual conversation? Bam, that can just make coaching valuable just with that one question.
Yes, but I would add one caveat to that. So the what do they need from me, as long as I can make that, how do I say this? As long as I can make that about what do they need from me for their own self-growth, not what do they need from me to give them, provide them, make for them so that their days, I don't know, so they have less prep to do. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
I'm not going to make that poster for you. I'm not like, you might need that from me, but I'm not going to do that for you because that is not contributing to your self-growth. I'm not going to like be the person that enters all your students' data into this spreadsheet that you want to then use. Like that's that's not going to contribute to your self-growth, that kind of thing. So
Yeah,
as long as
absolutely.
it's focused on like, what do they need from me for their self-growth, then yes, definitely.
And you just brought up data, so I want to ask you some questions about data. In your opinion, in your experience, what does data look like from the coaching work that the teachers are doing with students? Is there any data that you or your teachers are collecting to help improve student learning and recognize the impact of coaching? What does any of that look like in your context?
I gotta be honest, I like so little. Like, I like, to be totally honest, so little. So that is the big question I wish I could answer. I don't know how to answer that question. So I can tell you what we've tried or what we have, but so with like some of the blended learning projects that we did last year, we collected student data around whether it improved student learning. Basically, yes, it did. It didn't, and in a couple of places it was like, well, it didn't really improve, but it didn't get worse. So we're taking that as a win, that kind of thing. But that is not necessarily a reflection on the coaching. Like, that is a reflection on how that project went and how the blended learning impacted overall learning. Measures of my effectiveness, like, oh my God, we have tried so many things. So we have leadership standards, and we also have coaching standards. And I am meant to be using both of those as I develop my PLP, my professional learning project, I guess that's what it's called, where I set my own professional goals each year. It is so murky to figure that out, like where I am in those standards. I feel like I straddle two sets because I am a leader and a coach. But then collecting data on those standards, like, I don't even know how I would, like, we have not solved that problem. At the end of last year, because I was desperate for some data, I remember talking with Anne-Marie Chow, our literacy coach, about what she does for that. And she's like up against the same issues. She works with a smaller team, smaller groups, smaller teams, I guess, than I do. And so what she did, and this was not feasible for me, but what she did is she met individually with each person that she's been coaching, and she had like a series of questions that she asked them in response to, and she made notes on all of them, recorded the conversations, and then she kind of collated that data herself. And I was like, there's no way I can do that with like all my tech mentors like that. That is not possible. So what I decided to do was to have that conversation with the two, like, I was like, I can do that with like one or two. So I targeted the one or two that I really was the least sure about in terms of like, how am I doing as the coach with them? And so I invited them to an interview, and it's like the kind of thing where like we have a good relationship, but I don't know if I'm always meeting their needs. It's that kind of situation because they're not as upfront for whatever reason, or I can't read them. And so I did have meetings with those two and asked them some very specific open questions, and they gave me great feedback. They were very honest. I'm very glad they did not hold back. And then to the rest of the tech mentors, I sent a survey. And actually I asked those two individuals if they wouldn't mind doing the survey too, and they said, sure. I was like, some of it's a bit of a repeat, but I'd like to have like some more quantitative data. And so, so I sent a survey, and the survey was based on, let's see if I can remember. It's a Jim McKnight resource that Olivia, she's our literacy coach in the primary school. She had shared that with our coaching team as like an end of year reflection kind of thing. And I was like, ooh, this is really good. I can use parts of this. So I adapted that and it was something that was published on a Jim McKnight's, is it McKnight or Knight? Jim Knight, do you know?
Knight, just Knight.
Knight, sorry. I don't know why I'm thinking McKnight. So it was on his blog, and I just adapted that and put it into a Google form and sent that to my tech mentors, and it was really great. So that I read every little piece of feedback, and that's helped me a lot this year. So
I love the idea of just having a conversation, like maybe not a little conversation, maybe it was a long conversation, but I love the idea of just sitting down with a couple people and saying, look, I really want to be better at my job. Can you help me? Here are some things.
That's pretty much it. But then I'll also say, like, so Andrew sends out those surveys, those big staff surveys on both campuses, and he does that not every year, but like every 2 years, I think, to compare the data over like from the last time we sent it to this year, just to see like, have you had access to a coach, and like the numbers go up, and like, do you feel like they're giving you good professional learning? Yes. If so, like rank them in order, which ones have been most effective. So like, that's really good data too. And it's self-report, but it's still like, how do you measure the effectiveness of a tech coach in a school? I don't know the answer to that. Like, I just don't know.
I don't think anybody has the answer, but I think it is really interesting to hear the different strategies that different schools are trying. And I actually think I would like to find a way, and this has come up in other conversations, where we can share some of that stuff in a central space.
Yeah.
So like what really works at UWC might not work at another school, and that's totally okay,
sure.
but it might provide a spark of inspiration that you could say, okay, but I can adapt it and do this. And over time, I think, because we have more schools with more coaches, it's becoming more of an expected thing, especially in larger international schools, especially larger international schools in Asia. I think the more we share, the more we can try to find what works for our individual context. So I don't think anybody has like a list that they can rattle off, but that's exactly how they do it. So you're not alone.
Yeah.
So thinking about that feedback that you got and maybe other things that you hear from teachers, what are ways that you make yourself invaluable as a coach? What are some things that you do that teachers really appreciate?
Consistency as much as possible. So like consistency in communications. A lot of it, I think, is just reliability. Like, I'm big on following up on things. Like if someone said, oh yeah, let's meet in 2 weeks to do that, I'll right then and there, I'll be like, okay, let's set a date. And sometimes people get the sense of panic on their face, but they're like, what, really? Okay. Oh, I really have to do that then. Yeah, well, okay. You said you were going to. So I'm pretty good at that. And the feedback I've had says like, people like to be held accountable, and like it pushes a little bit. So I'm good at that. I've gotten so much better at becoming more invitational in my coaching. I think that helps because then there's no threat. Nobody feels like they're being evaluated. It feels much more like it's coming from the person. Well, it does come from the person themselves, so that the coachee is empowered to direct things in whatever way they want to go. So I really, I think that's something that I've become a lot better at. I just don't know if I'm amazing at it, but that's something that people noticed. So that's good. I'm trying to remember what else people said in that feedback. I think, well, to a lot of those, I'm thinking about my tech mentors again, like I do my research. So if I've had a meeting with a tech mentor and they're like, yeah, I'm looking for some more ways to do X, Y, and Z, I will be like, okay, that's in my task list. And I make sure that when I come back to them, I have resources and research for them to either evaluate themselves or for us to look at together and make decisions about. I don't know. Those are the things that I'm remembering that people said they appreciated. It's hard. Yeah. Like I used to be so much better at staying on top of like trends and new technology. And that has kind of fallen by the wayside. That used to be one of my strengths. And now I just feel like my focus has shifted so much on working with people that it doesn't mean that I'm still not like, I'm not in the loop at all. It's just that I kind of let some of those things come to me more naturally than I used to seek them out more. So I don't know. I think I'm going off topic here, but I think my focus has just shifted.
Well, I think that's a really good point. I think it was the way you've described the evolution of your position at this school and the way I would see my own personal experiences coaching. It was about like, what's the next cool thing in technology? And so that was really important. That was what people valued. But now if it's more of a coaching and consulting conversation, it's much more about what does that teacher need and being responsive to their needs and not evaluating what they're doing and feeling like you guys are on a journey together and you're supporting them in their professional growth. I think to me, coming prepared and doing your research, that's what's being on top of the trends now, because it's really personalizing learning for those individual teachers.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, that's been my shift.
Nice. So those are all the great things that coaches do, in particular, the great things that you do. Where does coaching fail, or where do coaches fail? Where does it go wrong, and what can we do about it?
Where does it go wrong? This is a tough one. I think it goes wrong when things are forced, or they feel forced. Sometimes I'm asked, this doesn't happen so often anymore, but sometimes I'm asked to be a part of a conversation by like someone on the team, let's say, when not everyone on the team wants me to be part of the conversation. It fails also when I ask the wrong questions about whatever we're working on. So I'm not a subject expert in every subject. Like, my background's English and drama and some humanities. But when I walk into a math meeting, I have to really be careful about which questions I ask, because sometimes even just the tone that I ask it with can make it sound like I'm A, completely stupid, which sometimes I am, or B, like I'm questioning what they're doing. Even if sometimes it's a naive question, like just the way it comes out of my mouth can sound really threatening. So I have to be really careful about that, because that can ruin a relationship really fast. It's like I have to play things really carefully. It's like gets political sometimes. Like, I'm going back to the example of like when one person on the team invites me to be part of a meeting and no one else on the team knew I was coming. So awkward. So I've gotten better about asking more questions around that, and then being strategic about how that communication works. So if one person on the team asks me, and then I kind of like dig around a little bit, like, so, okay, who's actually leading the team? Like, who sets the agendas? And then I'll be like, great, thank you like so much for the invite. And then I do a little bit of background work, and I go talk to the head of department, or talk to the, like, so-and-so told me or mentioned, or like, what do you think about? But it's that kind of thing. Like, I used to not do that, and I just came out of some really awkward meetings and like never got invited back. So my answer to the where do coaches fail comes in the relationship category again. Like, just really thinking about like, what are the intentions here? Who's it coming from? What's the larger goal? Doing my homework before I go into unknown situations. I think it can be really dangerous sometimes if, as a coach, like, you're an expert in your area, right? You're an expert in my case, in the digital literacy area. But it can be dangerous if you really do think you're an expert all the time. Or you go, it's like someone says, oh, well, you're the one that knows all about digital note taking, so come in. Well, if I go in actually thinking that I am the expert on all things digital note taking, then that meeting is not going to go well. So it's like bringing some humility to the role, I guess, like just reminding myself that, like, yes, I'm being asked to come in as an expert, but like, I really am not the expert. There's no real expert when you're working with a team. So it's that kind of thing. It goes back to the relationships.
I think that idea of bringing humility.
Sorry, one second, Kim.
So I love that idea of bringing some humility to the role, and hearing that makes me think about some good tips, or what good tips you might have for a new coach, someone who's starting in a new school. It doesn't even necessarily have to be a new coach, but anybody who's getting started in a new school. And to me, that humility, that seems like a good tip. Any other tips that you have?
Yeah, like humility, but like definitely, like, my first tip would be like, get your ego out of it. Like, get that away, and like just walk into every situation with an open, curious mind, and like genuine curiosity, and learn to be a really good listener. Because that's how you will develop the relationship. So asking those really curious questions and actually listening to the responses you get, and then responding to those appropriately, maybe even with more questions. I think that's so important. Like, get to know as many people as you can. Like, just get yourself out there, like go to all the social events, be the person who's in the staff room at break time getting a coffee. I don't know, not everybody's as confident as I am with this, but I just like walk up and introduce myself to people. If I've seen them a couple times in the middle school and I don't know who they are, I'll just be like, hi, I'm Adrienne. I'm like working in this part of the school. I've seen you a couple times, but I don't know your name, you know, that kind of thing. Use allies, like find out who your allies are and tap into them, because that can be like one of the first relationships you develop. And then you might even be able to develop examples with that person and models of things that can then be shared later. Open communication with leadership. So with your principal and vice principals, like something I do that I found really valuable is with our vice principal, like we have regular meetings and they're just to touch base so that he knows what I'm working on in different parts of the school. So he oversees the academic curriculum, but he kind of wants to know which teams I'm working in and things like that. And he's a valuable resource for me as well, because he knows those heads of departments and the department politics so well. He can tell me, like, just back off from that department for a bit. Like, I know you're getting a bit of pushback and you need to just like chill because they're not ready for it yet. Or he can do the opposite and be like, oh my gosh, I had this request and I'm telling them to come to you. Like, they need it. So be really open with that about what the challenges and struggles are, because your leadership can be a resource. Calendar time for yourself. That would be another one of my tips for a new coach. It's so easy. Like, one of the first things you realize when you come in this role is that your time is not your own. Your time is what like other people's task lists becomes your time. And so maybe not right away in the school year, but like a few weeks into the school year, once you start to get a rhythm of how the year is going to go, that's when I start to go to my calendar and I'm like, okay, so this block every Friday, I am blocking that off for me. And I mark it in my calendar. Like I said, they're visible. So people see that that's what I'm just working on my stuff. And sometimes during that, 40-minute period on Friday, I am not in my classroom. Like, you'll have to go to your way to find me. And if I don't do that, like, I discovered this the hard way. If I don't do that, then I'm stuck at like 5:30 every night working on my own stuff, and that's not fair. So it's about like drawing some boundaries around yourself. That's
awesome. That was tons of tips. Along those lines, I'm going to ask you the hardest question of this conversation. What is just one professional growth resource that has been very impactful in your coaching practice that you would recommend to others, and why that one thing?
Okay, there's many, but one, I have to reach back to show it to you. Hang on a sec. Is this ridiculously expensive book. It is so crazy expensive. And if your library can get a copy, then just borrow it like I did and steal it and stick your own notes and sticky notes in it. But like, this book has been such a tremendous resource for me. And I think there's even a newer edition to it, but it's The Adaptive School. The subtitle is A Source Book for Developing Collaborative Groups. And that is so much of my role.
I have it somewhere over there. I'm looking at my bookshelf. I'm like, where is it? I have it over there somewhere.
I'm going to have to buy my own copy of this because it's getting so used and I'm wanting to write in it and it's not mine. So but it's crazy expensive. It's like $100+ on Amazon. So I don't know. I'm just going to have to save my pennies and just suck it up. But and it's even labeled education coaching. Like, that's what it's for. And I discovered this book because our school leadership uses so many things from this book. And so I think it was Stuart, our director of teaching and learning, or it might have been Mike, who I mentioned earlier. One of them turned me onto it, and I went to look for a specific thing that they had told me about in this book. And then I found all these other things, and I was like, oh my God, this is a treasure trove. So there's many, many other amazing resources, but this is the one that I keep coming back to. And it seems so weird that the digital literacy coach's best resource is this one book. But
not weird. Not weird at all.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today, Adrienne. That was like tons of tips and strategies for coaches. I think that this is super valuable, and it was especially interesting to hear a little bit of the contrast between previous experience and this experience, because I think it's like both ends of the spectrum. So being able to talk to other coaches who have that kind of big stretch of experience really helps make everything that you say relevant for all different types of coaches, because everyone's in their own unique context. So thank you so much for that.
Yay, no worries.
Thank you so much for watching our video today. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you'll know when we release a new video each week. At Aduro Learning, as you know, we want to help you coach better. To get you started, we've got a free digital download for you called 5 Strategies for Your Coaching Toolkit right in the description box below. And if you're looking for even more, we now offer private coaching sessions to help you work through any specific issue you might be having as a coach or even just as an educator. Do you have a problem you can't seem to solve? Get your introductory private coaching session for free with us. Learn more at adurolearning.com/private coaching. Thanks for joining us today, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.